Keep listening for This Just In from Outdoors, environmental news for the Monterey Bay, only on KZSC Santa Cruz. KZSC.
Now, young fellas, been having a lot of fun around here today, haven't you? You know what makes this all possible? This forest around us. We should all be thankful for our forest.
You're tuned in to This Just In from Outdoors. Thanks. Today we feature a story about the Nature Corps Volunteer Weekend, which happened May 17th to 19th. With environmental news headlines and more, stick around.
This Just In from Outdoors.
91 years ago this spring, the St. Francis Dam collapsed, sending a 160-foot wall of water crashing 54 miles from Santa Clarita to the beach in Ventura. It killed about 450 people, the second deadliest disaster ever in the state. President Donald Trump signed a law in March establishing a national memorial there, and now the Angeles National Forest has 3 years to come up with a management plan. Forest Supervisor Jerry Perez says the memorial will serve a dual purpose.
So I think the importance of it is to acknowledge the loss of human life and the importance of sound infrastructure in Southern California.
Investigations done after the tragedy determined that the rock on the south side of the dam was unstable and that engineers failed to fortify the base when they raised the top of the dam an extra 10 feet. Perez says the lessons learned have since informed generations of civil engineers, including those who worked on the Hoover Dam. Last weekend, volunteers removed trash near San Francisco Creek, which runs through the dam site and supports 2 endangered species, the California red-legged frog and a fish called the unarmored 3-spined stickleback. Alan Walker is with the nonprofit Resource Institute, which is working on a project to improve the creek that will then inform the management plan.
What we're trying to do is look at a way naturally to incorporate the existing site conditions into a natural feature that will allow these organisms to move up and downstream and being extremely respectful of the cultural resources that exist, especially at the St. Francis Dam site.
The project is a partnership between the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the Angeles National Forest, Resource Institute, and SWCA Environmental Consultants. The site is open to the public. It's northeast of Santa Clarita off Interstate 5. There is a plaque at the site of one of the power stations that was destroyed, as well as multiple places to pull off and see the giant pieces of concrete that washed down the valley almost a century ago.
Alex Weber removed 50,000 golf balls from the waters off the Pebble Beach Golf Links, Monterey County's world-renowned golf course. If the balls had stayed offshore, they would have released microplastics into the ocean. Now, Weber and her friend Ethan Estes, a Santa Cruz-based artist and marine scientist, have begun work on a project to start a conversation about plastic pollution worldwide. They're working to build a wave sculpture out of 20,000 golf balls. To contribute to the effort or learn more, visit gofundme.com/for-the-waves.
The Santa Cruz City Council held a meeting on Tuesday, May 8th that planned how to bridge a current $4 million deficit in the city's budget. Starting with the new fiscal year, which begins July 1st, the city services will be required to make reductions from its $106.4 million general fund to offset rising costs and decreased revenue. Earlier this month, city staff tried a first pass at lessening the city's then $3.2 million deficit with an unplanned $500,000 in new spending proposals added by city leaders. The council had also instructed the city officials to reduce Santa Cruz's cannabis tax rate. This action was voted upon on Tuesday, and if passed, it would mean an additional $200,000 loss to the city's general fund. Santa Cruz's capital improvement projects that lack funding have grown to $310 million, and no new funding is scheduled to come from the city general fund. Some of these unfunded projects include replacing the Harvey West ball field lighting, renovating the Pogonip Clubhouse, replacing fire stations, and citywide storm drain work. Santa Cruz City Council was hesitant to go along with the city officials' recommended cutbacks in the areas of neighborhood security guard patrols and arts grants that totaled up to $237,000. This Tuesday, officials were to make a more formal stance on the budget spending and revenue and cutback decisions. The final budget approval is scheduled for June 11th. If enacted, this week's new revenue ideas and cutbacks would shave off $3.2 million of the predicted $3.9 million shortfall. The $1.1 million of newly proposed cuts includes eliminating every one of 3 citywide information technology department workers, eliminating the $75,000 set aside for cutting back vegetation at the city's urban interface, and a 22% reduction in tenant attraction and retention programs. The City Council also may opt to reduce spending on traffic signal repairs, bus tickets for the homeless, and the watering of city parks. If the council was to use its reserve funding to cover expenditures instead of making cuts, the rainy day fund would be depleted by 2022.
On June 8th from 12 to 2:30 p.m., the Chadwick Garden is holding an afternoon of poetry and music. There will be readings by poets Charles Atkinson, Danush Lamaris, Maggie Paul, Robert Pesh, David Robles, and Parini Sundaralingam. Music by singer-songwriter Nick Gallant will be featured as well. There will also be a silent auction. Admission is free, so come enjoy an afternoon of poetry in the garden. The Nature Corps is an organization that holds a variety of volunteer events at various state and national parks. The Nature Corps works with parks officials so that volunteers can truly be effective. I had the opportunity to come along on a Nature Corps volunteer weekend, May 17th to 19th in Big Sur, California. The purpose of the weekend was to help volunteer at Point Sur with state parks officials and remove invasive species, ice plant, sweet alyssum, and New Zealand spinach. We stayed at the Pfeiffer Big Sur campground and worked at Point Sur for about 6 hours on Saturday morning. A variety of people from many different backgrounds were on this trip, but they all had one thing in common: a passion for the outdoors. I had the opportunity to talk with several of the volunteers this weekend. Gwen is from the Bay Area and was introduced to the Nature Corps through her place of work. I talked with her briefly about her experience with the Nature Corps through the years while we were pulling invasive species out at the dunes at Point Sur.
Hi, my name's Gwen Haney, and I'm from Oakland, California.
So how did you find out about the Nature Corps?
I was working at Chevron, and they have a corporate sponsorship, and an email went out to introducing a Sequoia trip, and I hadn't been to Sequoia National Park before, so I decided to join the trip.
When did you first get involved with the Nature Corps?
I think in probably 2015.
Nice. So how many trips have you done?
I think this is my 7th trip, and I've been to Sequoia, Yosemite, and Big Sur all a couple times each.
Yeah. So were all of those trips your first time going to those parks?
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes.
How did that make you feel about the park? Did it make you feel really connected to the place that you're visiting?
Yeah, actually I felt like I was getting the inside scoop because I was interacting with the park rangers and park services, actually making an impact while I was there. And when you volunteer with Nature Corps, you get prime camping, and sometimes you can't even get a camp spot unless you reserve a year in advance. So yes, absolutely. Super awesome.
Have you gone back to those places and since kind of reflected on your experience with Nature Corps?
I have. And I try to take more people every time I go and also discover a new hidden spot that I haven't been to yet.
Nice. So have you been to Big Sur before? Is this your first time here?
No, it's not my first time to Big Sur. I've been here a couple of times on my own and another time with Nature Corps. And the last time I was here, we actually stayed in the same campground. And they had planted, I think, roughly 7,000 to 10,000 seedlings, little trees around the campground. And it was when California was in a drought. And literally, our group took 5-gallon buckets of water and filled it up at the spigot and walked around the entire grounds and watered all the trees. So that was the last volunteer This volunteer event, being out at the dunes, it's totally different experience, and yeah, really awesome.
Yeah, so can you tell me a little more about like the different kinds of projects you've worked on with the Nature Corps?
Yeah, so the first project in Sequoia, we were repairing social paths, and social paths are when somebody decides to go off the trail. Maybe they see something cool or they want to go check out a different view, and they create kind of ruts in the trail. So what we were doing is we were taking debris and logs, etc., and blocking off social trails so people would actually stay on the path. Another volunteer outing, we went to one of the nurseries, and they had a bunch of different native species of not only plants but also trees, and they were trying to stimulate some regrowth, and the nursery had experienced some deterioration, so we built a retaining wall in the nursery, and then we also went through and cleared out and organized all of the different species of plants so it would be easier for the next group to come in and figure out where to plant them. What did we do in Yosemite? Yosemite has an amazing meadow, and I think Mark, which is the director of the Nature Corps program, he shared yesterday that meadows are roughly 2% of the geography in a national park, but represent about 75% of the habitat for wildlife. And so the meadows are really, really important for the national parks. And what we did is we removed a lot of the invasive non-native plants from the meadow in order to, stimulate growth for the native vegetation. But also, once water starts laying in the meadow, it generates kind of worn down paths, and we were digging out some paths in order to repair the meadow back to more of a level ground. So that's a couple of examples of what we've done.
Cool. So you mentioned that you work at Chevron. So do you have like any experience in conservation and this kind of stuff, kind of work?
I don't. And actually, I was a contractor for Chevron, and Chevron is a great organization, and they want to give back, especially to the environment. So I haven't had any experience in conservation, but it has been one of my personal interests. So that's where I choose to spend my volunteer time.
Awesome. So what does the Nature Corps mean to you, like in the grand scheme of like your life? Like when you look back on these experiences, how are you going to reflect on them?
Well, obviously an opportunity to go see national parks in a different way that people don't normally get to. I feel a sense of kind of community whenever I come to an outing. I've come as a sole girl traveler, and not knowing anybody, and have been able to connect and meet a bunch of different people, and also people that share kind of the same views and the same outlook, and enjoy the outdoors as well. So for me, it's giving back and experiencing the national park, but also being around a group of people, enjoying the time. I mean, it doesn't get much better than an all-inclusive camping trip.
This was Hashuk and Anita's first trip with the Nature Corps. They are also from the Bay Area. They're new to California and are excited to see the different parks of California. This was their first trip to Big Sur.
Oh, I'm Hashuk Kumar from Sunnyvale.
And I'm Anita Hussein from Sunnyvale.
Nice. So how did you guys hear about the Nature Corps then?
My parents are veterans, so I was researching for programs for them to do, and I came across the veterans retreat they do for couples, and then did some more digging and found out they do also non-veteran work.
Nice. So this is your guys' first trip with the Nature Corps. How is it going for you?
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Definitely good food.
Yeah.
Yeah, good company. Everybody enjoying themselves, which is great. The weather turned to be great as well. So far, excellent.
It's really awesome to see parks by giving back to them and doing something to leave the park better than we came to it. It's also really unique because we're in a part of the park that's actually close to the public, so we're getting some really awesome views that we wouldn't have otherwise had.
Yeah, definitely. So what's your guys' background? Do you guys do this kind of conservation work in your everyday life?
Well, I was in the Peace Corps, and so it was a different kind of volunteer service, whereas living abroad and focused more on hygiene and sanitation. But service is definitely a big part of our lives, giving back. And so getting connected with Nature Corps has been really, like Ashok said, 2 blessings in one.
Yep.
So do you guys go to parks often? Are you guys pretty outdoorsy people?
We like to go on hikes and spend a lot of time outdoors, go to local and regional parks. We're new to the Bay Area, so we haven't seen that many parks besides Sequoia and Yosemite. So this is our first time at Big Sur. We're really excited.
Nice. What's your favorite part of doing this kind of work?
Get to see the park, enjoy the new friends' company. I think it's good to learn about the park as well, the history. Enjoy yourself, basically.
Yeah, for me, it's like I said earlier, being able to, beyond not leave a trace, leave a positive impact on places that are sometimes destroyed by humans and by visitors and tourists.
Yeah, definitely. How does this kind of work make you feel about nature?
How does this work make us feel about nature? Definitely feel more connected to nature. Seeing different landscapes, learning about different plants and native species and invasive species. It's a lot of learning, and it's also a lot of doing, kind of experiential learning. Kinetic learning, which is really wonderful because I don't think I'm going to forget what an ice plant looks like after pulling so many.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a different kind of activity, right? It's
definitely.
It's also giving back. Instead of going on a hike, you're also doing a couple of other activities, getting to know other volunteers. And networking as well. So it's not just doing something that you're interested. It's also embracing other people's interests and getting to know new things. Also learning from them because we are new to this area, and we also can learn what else is nice or what is other interesting places around here. Yeah. So it's like I'm sure people who join here has the same level of interest. It's good. It's easier to get along and click.
Yeah. Christy is what they call a lifer. She's been volunteering with the Nature Corps for about 20 years and has gone on too many trips to count to a variety of state and national parks.
I'm Christy Hart, retired from Chevron, where I actually got introduced to the Nature Corps 20 odd years ago or so. Thanks.
Yeah. So can you tell me about your first trip that you went on?
Oh boy. It was in Yosemite, and it was a lot like what we're doing here, removal of invasive species, putting the meadows back to their natural state, which is very important.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the first one. I've done several others, planting trees in the sequoias, putting up railings at Mirror Lake, just a wide variety of things.
Do you know maybe an estimate of how many trips you've been on with the Nature Corps?
I really don't. I stopped counting.
It's just been lots.
Yeah, I've been participating in this type of program for at least 20 years.
Yeah. Wow. Nice.
So, yeah.
So can you tell me a little more about your background? Do you have any background in conservation and restoration work like this?
No, I really don't. I like being in the out of doors. Love being in Yosemite and Sequoia, seeing the redwoods and everything. Just trying to not do harm.
Yeah, definitely.
And anytime you can do a project like this, and you drive back by and you think, oh wow, I helped to do that. That's great.
Yeah.
It just gives you a sense of joy.
Yeah, definitely. Can you tell me about maybe the project that has stood out most in your mind?
I don't even know that it's specifically about the work that we did as much as it is the relationships that were formed with the other volunteers and with the people that work with Nature Corps. Just great people, great times. so I don't think I could pick one single trip.
Do you keep in contact with many of the volunteers that you meet on these trips?
Yeah, and a lot of times because we came in corporate groups, the people that we worked with, we were participating together. So, yeah.
Have you brought like other people out on these trips with you, or are you normally just coming out by yourself?
I have not. I generally just come by myself.
What would you say was your favorite park that you went to through the Nature Corps?
Yosemite.
Yeah.
It's like they say, we're loving it to death, and Nature Corps is doing work that brings it back to life. Yeah. So I'm very much in favor of that.
Yeah, definitely.
I think the thing that I appreciate about them the most is their work with underserved youth. So many people are stuck in cities, and they get these kids out into nature and let them experience what I've loved my whole life. We've got to start bringing up stewards for that now, or all of this is for naught.
So what do you do for your everyday job?
So I'm retired now. I've been retired for about a year.
Okay, nice.
So yeah, it gives me even more opportunity to get out and do it.
Yeah.
But they provide the opportunity. You can't just walk up to some place and say, "Hey, I'd love to pull weeds in your." So that's what Nature Corps is doing for me.
Definitely. What's maybe like a highlight memory that you have of working with Nature Corps?
So we one trip, we actually were transplanting sapling redwoods.
Oh, wow.
And taking them from super small containers and putting them in larger containers, and then taking the larger ones and planting them, and to see that progression. And then when you drive through the sequoias and you look and you see those trees, and it's like, wow, it took hundreds of years for those to get that big, and we were starting them just as little babies and carrying them along.
Mark Landon is the executive director and founder of the Nature Corps. I talked with him about his experiences with the Nature Corps over the years and what sparked his interest in organizing volunteers.
Hi there, Mark Landon, Executive Director of Nature Corps.
And so why are we out here today, Mark?
Well, it's gotten to the point this day and age that resource management in particular in these state parks, they just require just tons of manpower to get these habitats back into condition, and they can't do it alone. So volunteers end up playing a very, very special role in the preservation of our state and national parks. Back in the day, years ago, when I started the program back in 1987, and I came up with a group of volunteers and offered to help out, they just said, "You want to do what?" And there was a lot of resistance initially to the use of volunteers, but then as time went on and they realized that volunteers can do an amazing job, and there's so many of them that want to help out, that they are a tremendously positive force for the preservation of our state and national parks. And so now volunteers are incredibly welcomed to help resource management personnel help preserve these most cherished parts of California's natural history.
So what's your role in the Nature Corps?
I'm the executive director of Nature Corps. Started the program in 1987, and I had an interesting career in that when I graduated college, I got a job working for Jacques Cousteau, who was an undersea photographer. He made these amazing documentaries. And back in the day, people would just flock home. I mean, they couldn't wait to get off work to watch his documentaries because the world had never really seen whales and sharks and the coral reefs and all that. So this was like a way of opening up that entire ecosystem to the public, and they just loved it. So anyhow, I worked with him for about 5 years and now in the nonprofit world. And then unfortunately, his son died in a plane crash, and I went to work for the American Cancer Society and had worked for them for about 5 years, and I came across an article that talked about the needs for volunteers in the national parks, and I thought, wow, that sounds really cool. I'd like to get behind that movement, and so that's what happened back in 1987. So it's been fun because there's been so many great accomplishments, everything from preserving the habitat around the General Sherman tree, the largest living organism in the world, to planting 20,000 trees throughout Sequoia and Kings Canyon. 3,000 of those trees were planted in memory of the victims of September 11th. So it's been fun just to get all these amazing things accomplished and to do it with people who really want to make a difference. So the wonderful thing about Nature Corps is that we have this huge extended family of people that left their personal conservation legacies in these magnificent national parks. And so many of them will come year after year just to see how their trees are doing and how their meadows look. They really have a personal investment in those parks.
So what all does Nature Corps do?
Well, we have programs like this weekend where we just basically invite individuals to come out and help out. But we also have programs for underserved youth. And we have a STEM focus, the science, technology, engineering, and math focus. And we're trying to get younger people involved in stewardship and to embrace the volunteer ethic and to help preserve these parks, because as time goes on, especially as more and more people use the parks, they're going to be the ones that either make it or break it for the future of the parks. So we've really got to get them on board with the understanding that their help is really needed to preserve these parks. Otherwise, it won't happen. So that's one of our goals. And then we also have programs for veterans, particularly military couples. A lot of them come back from combat and they find their marriages are in complete shambles. And so we put on a marriage retreat for them up in Sequoia National Park. And we have a program that we use up there called Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage. And it's just very lighthearted and easygoing. You know, they can kind of reconnect with one another and they volunteer together and they build their own personal conservation legacy. And at the end of the weekend, each couple gets a little tiny baby sequoia seedling and they wander off into the forest and they plant this tree as a sort of like a symbolic gesture of their commitment to one another. And it's super meaningful. They are so appreciative of that opportunity. It really is. I think of all the things I've done over the last 30 years, that's the one that touches me the most deeply. But on a personal level, it's been such a, and I encourage young people too that are interested in conservation to really pursue it, because I look back on my career of all these years, 32 years, and I am blown away at what people have done and the accomplishments that have been made. Like I'll pull up some resource and stop and look at the surroundings and go, wait a minute, we planted all those trees. Mm-hmm. So it's like you forget about all this stuff, but yet, it's like now they're 17 feet tall and, it's such a rewarding feeling. I can't tell you. Mm-hmm. I think that one of the things too, if you're into working with volunteers and you enjoy working with people, it's great because you do have this like extended family of people that are sort of like on the same wavelength. They have the same values and they appreciate the outdoors, and it's so neat to reconnect with people, and they'll say, remember when we planted this, or when we stored that meadow, or we, planted those trees. So it's just a lifestyle of conservation and stewardship, and when you look back on it, you think, wow, that was really a cool journey. Yeah.
It was really amazing to see how all of these people from totally different backgrounds came together over a passion for the outdoors and conservation. The Nature Corps has a variety of trips throughout the year for a variety of different purposes. You can get more information about the Nature Corps at thenaturecorps.org. Thanks for tuning in to This Just In from Outdoors. Check out our stories and past shows online at newsfromoutdoors.bandcamp.com. I've been your host, Alyssa Logalbo. Our headlines were produced by myself, Daniel Martinez, Gina Raineri, Madeline Carpu, and Adelaide Carlson, with Suzanne Potter of the California News Service and Anthony Leiserowitz of the Yale Center for Climate Communication. The story on the Big Sur Volunteer Weekend was produced and edited by Alyssa Logalbo. Thanks again for listening. We'll be here next Thursday at 5 p.m. for another edition. Until then, we'll see you outdoors.
Just bees and things and flowers. Just bees and things and flowers. Sunshine.
Now, young fellas, been having a lot of fun around here today, haven't you? You know what makes this all possible? The sparks to surroundings. We should all be thankful for our Father.
This just in from Outdoors.